I hope you find valuable as always. Talking about food and how oftentimes we evaluate the quality of a food in isolation, and maybe that food is a little more complex than that, and that's why we have difficulty. Also, one of the many reasons we have difficulty research literature trying to figure out what's healthy, what isn't, what is effective. So before I jump into that, be sure to subscribe and like this video if you end up liking it. Hit the notification bell. Thank you for all those subscribed already. As always, trying to get the channel growing, and I appreciate those of you that have kind of been along for the ride. I know I had a lull there, wasn't releasing videos, but plan on doing a more consistent release now. Anyway, let's get into this. One times like we think about food, one of the most common kind of metrics, it's not as common as it was, but it's still kicked around a lot, is the glycemic index. It's just rated on white bread, just hypothetically food that's been stripped of all its nutrient value, and then you compare food to that and how fast it goes through your body, essentially. And then there's glycemic load, which is a little bit more helpful. It's looking at, okay, the size of the food in relation to how much, sugars in it, if you want to keep it real simple. Something like grapefruit is you get a lot of food for the amount of glucose that you take on board. And so, that's certainly helpful, but remember, most of the time, and something like a piece of fruit or something you might eat in isolation, sure, but a lot of times we eat food together. Like I'm not saying there isn't moments where you don't eat white bread or some variant by itself, but many times we eat food with that. So let me give you an example of this when you're thinking about evaluating food. The whole white rice versus brown rice debate, which one's healthier? And it's often espoused that brown rice is healthier, and it certainly it has all the qualities of a slower carbohydrate, a complex carbohydrate. But we can get into things like phytates and whether that is detrimental to potentially health. I don't want to go down that road, but the point is that here's this in isolation. Here's this rice that should go slower through the body, and it likely does. And that white rice is awful because it'll go through you really quickly. Well, if you ate that white rice with a big steak, so you ate it at the same time, or you ate the steak before you ate the white rice, it's going to slow down the digestion of that white rice. I kind of look at it this way. The reason fruit, even though it is not a quote-unquote complex carbohydrate, the reason that it goes through your gut slower and it's not considered unhealthy is because of the skin, right? The skin has fiber in it. And so you kind of have, there's a kind of different ways to construct a complex carbohydrate. You can just have like a whole grain source, where it's got to be broken down slowly over time, or you can take sugar and mix it with fiber, which is kind of the same thing, right? And so we could do the same thing, though, doing some other mixing, like taking white rice and mixing it with protein. So when you're evaluating a food, yes, evaluate it in isolation. What I mean by that, again, is white rice good or bad? I would say neither. But if you pounded bowls of it in isolation and you are not physically active, or you're not eating it right after training. I mean, bodybuilders have been eating white rice for a long time because of the commensurate spike in insulin and the mitigation of cortisol levels, right? I mean, that's why carbs and protein appear to be very effective together. I know there's research that kind of counters that in places, but in general, right, they tend to go well together. One is more anabolic protein, and one is more reducing the catabolic, which would be the carbohydrates. So unless you're physically inactive and you're sitting and watching, you're binging on your latest streaming service and not doing anything, yeah, eating white rice in isolation may not be a good idea. But if you are using it post-training or even pre-training, depending if it's the couple, an hour to 3 hours out, whatever you're doing, and you eat it with a protein source, it's going to go through you slower. So I'll talk about this when we talk about flexibility. I fall into this too, and in itself is a blanket statement. We like blanket statements. We like saying, because we feel more in control, right? Well, never do this, never eat that, never, always do this, always do that. Okay. There are a few blanket statements I would sign off on, like always eat as many fruits and vegetables as you can stand. That's a good idea. But things like, hey, never eat white rice, it's bad for you. Okay. It depends on the situation. Okay. So, the point of this video is just as we look at food, we're taking something that's complex and we're trying to control it by just categorizing it and saying good or bad. And certainly there's things that are good or bad. Like if all you eat is, cheese spray all the time, that's probably bad, right? Or if all you eat is, your favorite, Twinkie variant, that's bad, right? But otherwise, outside of those extremes, when we get into kind of like not snacky and junk food, is are eggs good or bad? Let me give you another example. Well, it depends, right? How many yolks are you eating with the egg, and when are you eating them for what purpose? You just want a little flavor. Maybe one yolk mixed in with 3 egg whites would be a really helpful way of reducing the saturated fat. If you're trying to gain muscle mass, though, the whole egg probably is effective because it's a nice little package of fat and protein. That can be a really nice bolus if you're trying to gain muscle mass. If you have high cholesterol, maybe not a good idea to pound that as many of those yolks. Again, is a big it depends factor when you're talking about nutrition. So just a little critical thinking skills, I guess, is what I'm encouraging. And on top of that, what's the physical activity level? Consistently. I'll get into later on like the keto diet, things like this. Are these good diets? And I think that's the wrong question. The question is this diet fit the lifestyle of the individual? That's the better question. There's certainly better diets in terms of food quality emphasis, and that's really one of the things, and I'm getting the weeds here, I'll end it here, but that's one of the things that I tell people, if we're going to, like, if I was to give you some general advice on diet, eat as many fruits and vegetables as possible, and eat the healthiest food that you can afford. And how do you gauge health? Well, when you go to the supermarket, the difference between, beef that is loaded with saturated fat and beef that is a little leaner, right? Or when you go to the supermarket and the middle of the store is processed food nation. Not that I don't enjoy processed food every once in a while too, so don't think that I'm, advocating you can never have processed food. But in general, right, the middle of the store is processed food nation, and for the most part, the stuff on the outside of the store is more fresh, other than the bakery, which is fresh too usually. That might be a way of kind of like understanding, am I eating healthy or am I not? That's just, again, that's not a perfect formula either, but it's a way of kind of gauging what's healthy and what isn't. And I think we all kind of know that. We've been drilled in our heads what's a healthy food and what isn't. So anyway, that's just general advice. Again, the whole point of this video, though, is just to encourage, like I mentioned before, some critical thinking skills when we start to say, is this a good food, good or bad? Well, we tend to eat foods together. And so what does that mean for that food? Then it's downsides. If an issue going through too fast through the gut, then maybe eating with a protein source mitigates that issue, and so then you get the benefits of it. All right, and I'm not saying then drink soda and eat steak and then, everything's going to be okay. I'm just saying a little critical thinking skills. All right, hopefully this is helpful. I'm starting to ramble. I'll see you guys in the next one.